I'm Beck and welcome to the Atlas Recap. I am recapping the Atlas 6 and the Atlas Paradox. Before you read the Atlas Complex, I'm going to be talking about the key characters in here, and then I will talk about all of the key elements in the plot for the Atlas 6 and then for the Atlas Paradox. So without further ado, let's get started. A quick overview is that the Atlas 6 is about 6 initiates, all chosen by the caretaker Atlas Blakely. All of the initiates are Medians, so magic users, and they are chosen to study by Atlas at the Great Library of Alexandria, which has an archives that accesses pretty much infinite knowledge. And this book is basically exploring what these characters would do for power and also how power changes them. Who are these 6 initiates? We've got Libby Rhodes. She's a physicist, which means she can wield matter, like fire, for example. She's also a very anxious person, and her anxiety is quite palpable, and all of the characters notice it and attribute it to something that is a key part of her. It's almost a counter because she's so anxious and morally good, but she's also got such overwhelming power with her physicist Median capabilities. Then we've got Nico di Verona, who is also a physicist, and he and Libby studied at the same school before they were both sought out by Atlas, and they are kind of like two sides of the same coin. Even one of them is right-handed and the other is left. They really complement each other's physicist abilities. Failure or ceasing to finish something is absolutely not an option for Nico, which is why he and Libby are academic rivals. He just constantly goes and goes and goes. He's kind of like a golden retriever who is a physicist who is all-powerful. Nico's roommate and basically best friend is also named Gideon, and Gideon's not human. He's the offspring of a mermaid named Elif. I think he's half mermaid, half satyr. And to everyone else, he appears like he's got narcolepsy, but he's actually a really powerful Median in his own right. Atlas probably would have picked him, but he didn't quite make the top 6, and Gideon can traverse dreams, which are the realms of thought in the astral plane. There is also ongoing romantic subtext between Nico and Gideon. Then we've got Raina Mori, and she is a naturalist. She can hear plants talking to her, but she has all of this power and can't access it by herself. She describes nature as that annoying, persistent sibling, and she often ignores it. Then we have Tristan Kane, whose father is a crime boss named Adrian Kane. They both come from a very wealthy pocket of society, and Tristan's ability is seeing through illusions, but we later find out different things about his powers and that he can't quite access all of them fully yet. So there's a lot of development of Tristan over the first 2 books in this series. Essentially, his magic works in an almost astral plane, and he can see everything in its unbiased state. Parisa is a telepath or a mind reader, which seems not as exciting compared to the other magic users in this book, where they can literally manipulate things you can see. But Parisa always says never underestimate the power of thought and ideas, especially specifically planted ideas. She's often quite manipulative, and she uses people's high emotions to increase how vulnerable they are mentally, and that's how she slips in and influences them. And then lastly, for the 6 initiates, we've got Callum Nova, who is an empath, so he can push and pull on people's emotions and manipulate them however he sees fit. He often says that he can undo someone within 4 sentences. He's very formidable, even though it doesn't necessarily appear that way from the beginning. Out of all of the initiates that Atlas picked, one of them has to be a sacrifice for the library, and Atlas chose Callum specifically as part of the 6 to be sacrificed. Then we've got the non-initiates, so Atlas Blakely is obviously the caretaker of the society. Like Parisa, he is also a telepath. He chose these initiates because initially he didn't want the society to be a thing, and he joined so he could undo it from the inside, and he wants to burn this world and create a new one. Like I said, years before he became the caretaker, he plotted to take down the society, but he didn't do it alone. He did it with Ezra, who in present day is Libby's boyfriend and then ex-boyfriend, but actually Ezra is older than he appears because he's a time traveler and he can jump through time. So while he has skipped different years, Atlas has spent all of those years and lived in the society. So both of them don't look the same age, but they have been working almost together or in tandem to take down the society until their ideas deviate from each other. Then we've got Dalton Ellery, who is essentially the face of the Alexandrian society, because when any initiate comes in, he is the face that greets them, and he's got quite a high charisma, but ultimately seems like kind of a boring person and doesn't seem to match the hunger or the ambition that the current initiates have. Parisa takes an immediate interest in him, sensing that something is held back or lacking, and recognizes that something in his head is broken. He's also a Median, and his magical capability is being an animator, so he can create life, essentially. And then it wouldn't be a society if there wasn't a rival society. So we've got the Forum, and they are an organization that believe in the dissemination of information rather than holding it hostage like the society. So where the society withholds information and there's a lot of secrets and power and intrigue, the Forum believe in sharing information and making that accessible to everyone. So now let's get into the plot for the first book, The Atlas Six. In the book, the initiates arrive at the Alexandrian Society and they get settled in, and shortly after they've arrived and met each other, the Forum attacks the society. Some of the initiates actually manage to kill the assailants of the Forum who have attacked. Callum even convinced a woman to shoot herself, which deeply frightened Parisa. Libby defended against the attackers with fire, and she works together with Tristan because Tristan can see through the illusions of what these assailants are putting forward, and he tells Libby exactly where to shoot her fire, so both of them survive. Obviously, all the initiates are at the society to study something, but there are different levels of initiation, and so the library doesn't grant them access to everything they need to know for their independent study. As a side project, Nico manages to tap into Raina's strength and he creates a wormhole through time, but he just creates the wormhole from his room directly to the kitchen, so it's not anything massive, but Nico is really a fan of it. Libby is also smarter than people give her credit for because they tend to write her off because she's such an anxious person, but it's her that recognizes that Tristan might have more to his magical capability than he initially thinks. Libby says if he can detect and see different matter, then potentially he can manipulate it at a quantum level. So could he manipulate time? Then after these characters get settled, you see them pursuing their independent study and interacting with each other. Dalton and Atlas put all of the initiates to a test. It is this time that Callum decides to go full throttle and he influences Parisa to tell him about herself and all of her deepest, darkest secrets, and he leads her to the edge of this balcony and she is about to jump off when it is revealed that they are in the astral plane of someone's mind rather than being in reality. So there was no danger for her actually physically jumping, but it shakes everyone to their core anyway, and Parisa engineered this to occur in Nico's head rather than in her own or in Callum's, so she kind of removes it from herself, but in doing so she really shakes Nico, and she also causes unrest for everyone, showing Callum's interaction with her. The reason that she went head to head with Callum and kind of let him take over, even though she divulged a lot of her deep insecurities, she did it intentionally so that she could expose how terrifying and powerful Callum is. Seeing how he initially worked when the Forum broke in, she wanted to expose him to everyone. Ultimately, Parisa wants Callum gone, and she has picked it out of Dalton's mind that one of the initiates must die, so she's like, I will choose Callum on behalf of all of us and show everyone that Callum needs to go. Parisa is also sleeping with Dalton, and she manages to push inside his mind when he is vulnerable or when they're asleep. Often he lets her in but doesn't realize the extent that she is getting into his own head, and she discovers that he has built himself a castle in his own mind. Then there is a break in study because there is a ball on, but none of the initiates are properly initiated yet, so they can't attend. So the society says, go away and come back later. And while all of them are on a break and they have left the wards of the society and the library, the Forum tries to recruit every single one of them, and all of them reject the Forum. During the Forum's attempt to recruit Libby, Libby also has a fight with Ezra, and in distancing herself from Ezra and intending to break it off with him, but he's not really listening to her because all he wants to do is protect her, she's like, I'm out, goes back to the society just a little bit early, and she runs into Parisa and Tristan, who also decided to come back early, and they are sharing a bottle of absinthe together, and she joins in. Parisa can see into Libby's head and sees that she unconsciously wants whatever is happening with this absinthe fueled moment, and so she gives her a little bit of a push to kind of overwrite her anxiety, and Libby, Tristan and Parisa end up all sleeping together, and Parisa manipulated it that way so that the connection between Tristan and Libby deepens. Then when Tristan later is wandering around campus, he runs into Ezra, although he doesn't know that it's Ezra at the time, and Ezra is surprised that Tristan can see him, saying, I've never encountered another traveler before. Then the initiates all agree reluctantly to sacrificing Callum, which proves that they want this quest for power because they have collectively all agreed to kill someone in order to keep access to the archives. However, it needs to be a sacrifice and not a killing, so someone close to Callum who actually has some form of care for him must do the deed. It can't just be Parisa because she hates Callum and has no connection, so ultimately the group settle on Tristan to kill Callum because Tristan has a connection with him. When Tristan is confronting Callum just before he pulls out a knife, Callum says that Parisa has been manipulating Tristan, and Then Tristan realizes that Callum might have been doing the same thing. Tristan has a few moments where he does some tests to measure what his feelings and reactions are with and without Callum, and he does realize that Callum is manipulating him too, and ultimately that tips him in the favor of, okay, I will attempt to kill Callum. When he pulls the knife and he is about to kill Callum, a blood-curdling scream from Libby interrupts both of them, and they both stop what they're doing and come running. As a result of the scream, the initiates all go to the scene of the crime and they find what appears to be Libby's body, but Tristan said that there was a chime of discontentment from inside his brain. He can see through the illusions and he's like, this is not Libby. Callum also notes that there was anger and betrayal in Libby's scream, which leads him to believe that she knew who kidnapped her. If it's not her body on the floor, they assume she's been kidnapped rather than murdered. In actual fact, we know that it was Ezra who took Libby, and he took her in order to protect her from Atlas's plot, because Atlas intends to use all of the initiates for his own gain. Gideon, who is on the outside of the society and doesn't know where it is worried about Nico and hasn't heard from him in a while, so he does a deal with his mother Elif, and in that deal he says, I'll do a future favor for you as long as you tell me exactly where Nico is. As a consequence, Gideon has to break into somebody's mind, into their subconscious mind, and free something. Additionally, after Libby's disappearance, Gideon thinks she is lost somewhere in time because he has looked everywhere and he cannot find her. Then at the end of the Atlas 6, we are given a flashback for Atlas and Ezra, and they are both invited to the society as initiates. This is when we see them agreeing that they are going to take down the society from the inside, but of course, because Atlas spends so much time in present day at the society, he starts to be changed by power and access to it, whereas Ezra is outside of that and jumping through time in order to meet Atlas at different points and execute whatever plan they have going ahead. So because Ezra is kind of removed and Atlas is directly involved, both of them change. Ezra even says, no plans of mine involve killing anybody. And Atlas replies, then perhaps you underestimated what is necessary. Atlas ultimately wants to make a new world and raise the old one, and he says, let's be gods. And so ultimately Ezra panicked, he time traveled into the future to see what might become of Atlas's new world, and all he saw was destruction. This is a version of what could happen in the future, but it's not actually guaranteed to be the future. And so when he was an initiate 20 years ago, Ezra built a fallacy into the society's wards so that he could slip in and out undetected, and that in present day is how he snuck in and he stole Libby. The book ends with Dalton talking to all of the initiates in a particular class, saying that Rome falls and everything collapses, and Dalton recognizes about magic the security of containment, of power with purpose rather than power without cause. So now let's talk about the sequel, The Atlas Paradox, where destiny is a choice. So Libby is stranded by Ezra. He took her and he dumped her in 1989. He thinks that by trapping her there, he will save her from Atlas, but she has other plans. The studies for the other initiates in present day are ongoing, so they are subjected to a ritual. Dalton and Atlas put everyone together in a circle, and the initiates have to verse each other as a projection. This projection shows everyone their true perception of that person. Raina ultimately becomes angry at Nico of Nico's perception of her because Nico perceives her as weak. They often used to physically spar to keep fit, but Nico's projection of Raina is quite weak and predictable, and Raina takes offense at being seen that way, and so they have a falling out, but she never actually tells Nico what the problem is. She just decides that she's done with him. Then Tristan is up against a projection of Libby, who violently attacks him, and it's a perception of his own guilt because he is mentally attacking himself over the disappearance of Libby, which he believes is his fault. In his panic at the end of his battle with Libby, he ends up jumping a little before returning to his own body, and both Atlas and Parisa notice it. Something about his magic adjusted time to get him out of the projection early. Meanwhile, Gideon is sent on a mission by his mother Elif to break someone out of their own conscious mind, which is something that he agreed to do in book 1 and is now actioning in book 2. In 1989, Libby is visited by Gideon in her sleep, and through his motivation and her desperateness, she manages to break out of the motel room that Ezra has trapped her in, and she is now on the run, and she's going in and out of this dreamlike state because she's been on the run for 36 hours and is not really sleeping. So Gideon visits her intermittently and manages to get information out of her, and he realizes that she's in the year 1989, which he conveys to Nico. It's also worth noting that because there was no sacrifice of initiates, something is going on with the magic of the library, and all of them are starting to to feel these effects of being drained in various ways. Nico is the most obvious one, and he's got a physical reaction to it. Callum is also suffering very emotionally, and as a point to cope with it, he is very regularly inebriated. Then Raina is researching deities, and she's like, I can't do this by myself, so she gets Callum to help her, and he influences the archives so that she can access information that she needs, because the archives withhold information from people and don't give all of it over. Specifically, she's wanted reading material on gods, and the archive has told her no. She's talking to Callum, and she thinks she's a god. She says, we are in all the ways that matter. The power is real. The magic we have creates order. Everything may look perfectly random, but in fact, it's not to us. And Callum's like, girl, you're crazy. But he helps her anyway. Tristan's also trying to access and understand and use more of his magic, and he realizes he can only access this magic when he is on the brink of death, and he goes into like a fight or flight response. And so that leads to him knocking on Nico's door at like 5 a.m. and going, I need you to try to kill me. And so begins the experiment of Nico trying to kill Tristan so that Tristan can access his magic. Nico realizes, because he's actually quite a smart cookie, he realizes that if Tristan can access and use his magic, he can manipulate quanta, and therefore he would be more powerful as a Median than Nico or Libby are. Then we also get a perspective chapter or two from Ezra in this book, and it turns out that Ezra has chosen his own 6, although they're not initiates, they are external to the society. So he's chosen his 6 to kind of counter Atlas's, but because Ezra is such a poor planner and he doesn't see people's nature, he only sees his intention, all of it comes crashing down. But the 6 people that he chose are Nothazai or Nothazai, who is the head of the Forum. He's also a biomancer, so he can manipulate people's bodies, I think, to a certain degree. Then we've got James Wessex, Julian Rivera Perez, who is a CIA technomancer. We've got Dr. J. Arana, and a Median from Beijing that was easier to seek out than actually name. All of these people were selected by Ezra because they share a common cohort goal of taking down the society's privacy and sharing all the information they can. Ezra ultimately wants to disperse the power that has been accumulated by the society. James Wessex, who is one of the people that he has chosen, is also the billionaire who began funding for the Wessex Corporation, which is now a global corporation. And Tristan used to work there, and so did his ex Eden, and Eden is now James Wessex's assistant. Now we have the ball again in this book. However, this time the society initiates can attend, whereas last time they got kicked out of the grounds while the ball was happening. So it's an annual ball that the society holds and invites everyone they can, including the Forum. Dr. J. Arana, who is one of Ezra's chosen cohort, is invited to attend this ball. Her name also is Belen, and she is the same girl that Libby makes friends with back in 1989. Belen confronts Atlas because she hates everything that he stands for, but the conversation goes nowhere and she leaves in a rage. Ezra also attends the ball, and even though he's very heavily illusioned, Tristan sees through them and recognizes him anyway, because Tristan saw him once outside the grounds around the wards. And as Ezra is leaving, Tristan also runs into Nico, who is attending as well, and he says, I just ran into Ezra. And Nico goes, you know, that's Libby's ex-boyfriend, right? And then a few things fall into place. Tristan, for one, realizes that Ezra is Libby's ex-boyfriend and connects the dot that Ezra was hanging around one of the wards. Nico says, you mean where the Time Ward is? So now they both realize that Ezra could potentially be a time traveler, and he is likely the one who took Libby. They try to chase him down, but he's already gone. So Tristan and Nico end up going outside of the wards to find an energy source so they can work out how to reach Libby themselves. While they are outside the wards though, they get ambushed. While they take down their assailants, Nico realizes that he is a surprise and everyone is intending to take down Tristan. So they are potentially assailants sent by Tristan's father. One of the witches or the Medians that is attacking gets captured, and Callum interviews him because they bring him back to the society just outside the wards, and they're intending to go and get Parisa, but Nico runs into Callum and brings him along instead, and Callum pressures this person, and they reveal that they were sent by Adrian Kane to take down Tristan. So they were right, it was Tristan's father. Then we've got Raina, who is deeply spiraling, and she has decided that she wants to rebirth the world. So in order to change the world, she needs to use her power, but she can't do that by herself, so she makes a deal with Callum, and Callum ultimately agrees to help her do this. You don't know how yet, you just know that they're both going to at some point. But then we've got Dalton, and he's an animator, but his research is specifically about creation. Throughout this sequel, he's actually been quite unwell and sequestered away from everyone, and Parisa is kind of trying to hide him because Dalton had a piece of himself in his own mind, so his hunger or his ambition, and he surgically mentally removed it from himself and put it aside, and Atlas built this box around it, which he has then mentally turned into a castle. And at the beginning of the book, this is who Gideon was trying to break out of their own mind. So obviously Gideon has succeeded and Dalton is now broken out. Atlas has not sealed him away anymore, so Parisa is trying to hide the fact that Dalton is changing from everyone and rediscovering his hunger and ambition. In a conversation, Dalton tells Parisa though that he didn't realize that this other version of him, so there's like two sides of him at the moment before he becomes whole towards the end of the book, he didn't realize that this other version of him could get out. And this is the Dalton that created the animation of Libby, the one that everyone thought was her body but actually wasn't. Then we've got Libby in 1989 to 1990, and she leaves university for a week because she has lied to this university and said, oh, I'm just transferred over from somewhere else, I'm doing this kind of research, etc. And now she's made friends with Belen, who was also in this same course, and they've decided to go on a week's leave to find this energy source in Scotland, connected to the ley lines. While they are at the ley lines in 1989, Nico and Tristan are also at the ley lines in present day, and Tristan astral projects himself through time to talk to Libby. Before Tristan talks to Libby, Callum gave Tristan the precise mathematical calculations that Libby would need in order to get back to present day, but the amount of energy she'd need to harness to do that would mean a nuclear explosion in 1990. However, Tristan was like, I think she has already done it because there are no records of Libby Rhodes at that point in time, but there is also a record of an explosion in May 1990 that Parisa sourced through the archives, which has a lot of secret information. So the Wessex Corporation buried that information, but they have found it through the archives. So they've basically confirmed that even though Libby is supposed to be morally good, she's been changed by the archives and she will be selfish when she is desperate to get home. Belen, as a consequence, sees this conversation play out between Tristan and Libby, and Tristan at some point mentioned the society. So Belen goes, you're standing for all of these things that I fundamentally disagree with. Belen hates the power and corruption that the society and therefore Libby stands for, and she sees Libby decide to enact this explosion to return to her real life in present day. And Belen's like, that's it, I'm done. And they have a huge fallout. And this puts Belen on the path that we see in the future, where she has joined the Forum and she's full of rage and loneliness. We see a point of view chapter from Belen in present day when she's at this ball thrown by the society. Just after she has confronted Atlas and had a conversation that goes nowhere, she has no hope anymore. Like I said, she's full of anger and rage, and she runs into Nothazai and Ezra, who are also at the ball. And she basically says as much like, Ezra, you have done all of this based on one person, because she knew that Ezra's ex was Libby. And she's like, you've done all of this for one person and the universe should be about everyone. And she goes on this massive tirade. And as she's going on this massive tirade, she gets a heart attack and passes away. But I'm convinced that because Nothazai was there and he's a biomancer, he's potentially killed her so that Ezra and their cohort aren't exposed by her erratic behavior. So now that the 2 years of the initiates' first studies are over, they have to leave the society, but the Forum is waiting for them to leave the wards. They're planning to hunt them down. Now, Ezra was initially like, I want these people hunted down and exposed and shared their names, shared their specialties, share all the information that they access in the archives. But human nature doesn't quite work that way. So when he meant, I want these people hunted down, the people who are doing the hunting are like, I'm going to hunt and kill them. So now when they're leaving the wards, they know that wherever they turn up, there is going to be a trap set specifically for them and they're probably going to die. So to undermine whatever traps are set up, they agree to switch places, and so they magically appear outside the wards at each other's destinations, which confuses all the assailants trying to attack them. Parisa meets Dalton at a cafe outside of the wards, and Dalton asks her to join in the research that Atlas was initially using Dalton for, so the research into creation. Basically, Dalton is like, I want to beat Atlas at his own game and open a door into a multiverse to create a new world or discover if new worlds even exist. But to do this as an energy source, those two need Nico, Libby, and Raina. Raina and Callum both depart the society together, and where they appear, they are ultimately attacked by assailants, but they take all of them out except one, and that one Callum influences to take to their leader. So he's like, I want to meet the guy who sent all of you after us. When they meet this leader, Callum sits down cross-legged because he knew who this leader was, and he's like, I'm just here to talk about a mutual acquaintance. And he's sitting across from Adrian Kane. Rhaena is surprised, but she doesn't leave. Ezra senses the wards at the society aren't going to bar him anymore, which is weird, so he appears to Atlas and says, you let me in. Ezra is essentially coming undone. His purpose is unraveling, his plan is flimsy, the people that he chose aren't as reliable as he thought they were, and so he's starting to unravel and become weak in front of Atlas. Atlas keeps Ezra talking and keeps him distracted. Meanwhile, Libby appears back in present day. Her clothes are smoldering and she sends a fireball straight at Ezra, and I'm assuming she kills him. When Nico leaves the society, he appears in Paris and he meets up with Gideon, but before they can even start talking, there is an attack and it narrowly misses Gideon's head, but between both of them they manage to stop their assailants as well. After all of the romantic subtext across the two books, Gideon finally kisses Nico, and Nico is like, oh, so that's how it is, and returns the kiss, but then they are interrupted by the appearance of Libby. She says, Verona, we need to talk, just before she collapses and passes out into Gideon's arms. And there ends the Atlas paradox. And there you go, now you are well caught up to start the Atlas complex. Thank you so much for watching this video and happy reading. I'll come talk to you in the comments and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.